The email arrived at midnight, titled, "You have no idea what's coming." I sat frozen in my chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I just closed a multi-million-dollar deal that was supposed to secure the future of my company, my reputation, and everything I had worked for. But the message, written in a bold, cryptic tone, made me question everything. I clicked it open, and as the words appeared on my screen, my heart skipped a beat. "This is your final warning. Kneel or lose it all." I read the words over and over again, trying to make sense of them. Kneel. Lose it all. Was this some kind of twisted joke? But as the last line loaded, everything became painfully clear. This is not a game. It's over. Your company belongs to me now. My phone buzzed in the dark silence of my office. It was Nina, my business partner, my confidant, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. The woman I'd trusted to stand by me when things got tough. I answered it without thinking. "Nina. What's going on?" Her voice came through the line, a little too calm, a little too calculated. "I'm sorry, but you've been betrayed, Alex. The choice is yours, kneel, or give up everything you've built." I felt the weight of her words. Betrayed. My own partner had just handed me an ultimatum. But the one thing she didn't know was that I wasn't the type to kneel, not for anyone, not even for her. I gripped the edge of my desk, staring at the email again. This wasn't a threat. This was war. And Nina. Nina had already chosen her side. Alex stared out the window, his mind racing. The city lights below glowed with an indifferent brilliance, a cruel reminder of how small his troubles felt in the grand scheme of things. Yet, the weight of Nina's words pressed down on him like a stone in his chest. Kneel or lose it all. It was like something straight out of a thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was his life, his empire, and everything he had built since his college days. He'd come from nothing. Born to a single mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the bills paid, Alex knew what it meant to struggle. His ambition was a fire he'd stoked since childhood, always pushing himself to prove he was more than his circumstances. After years of sweat, grit, and more failures than successes, he founded his company, Greystone Enterprises, and turned it into a powerhouse. Every decision, every sacrifice had been made with one goal in mind: success. He'd built it from the ground up, brick by brick. But now, it was all hanging by a thread. Nina. He thought about her for a moment, her warm smile, the way her eyes sparkled with ambition just like his. She was more than just a business partner, she had been his anchor in the storm. Their relationship had started purely professional. They had met in a boardroom during a high-stakes pitch, both vying for the same client. They were rivals at first, but it was their shared hunger for success that had drawn them together. What started as mutual respect grew into something deeper, more personal. Somewhere along the way, they had become inseparable. Their partnership had been symbiotic. She was the visionary, the one who saw trends before anyone else, and he was the strategist, the one who made those trends work. They balanced each other perfectly. She made the big, bold moves while he ensured the foundation remained solid. Together, they had become unstoppable. But beneath the surface, there had always been an unspoken tension. An undercurrent of competition that neither of them had fully acknowledged. Could trust truly exist between two people who were, at the core, rivals? Alex ran a hand through his hair. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe that was where it all went wrong. Over the years, Nina had become more than just a partner, she was everything. The woman he turned to for advice, for comfort, for companionship. He had confided in her about his dreams, his fears, even his failures. And yet, the more he relied on her, the more vulnerable he became. Maybe that's why he had failed to see the cracks forming in their relationship. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Nina. "We need to talk. Meet me at the office tomorrow. It's urgent." Urgent? He had no idea what was going on, but he could feel the tension building in his chest. It wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. The next morning, Alex arrived at the office early, as always. He had always been the first one there, the first one to answer emails, make calls, and make things happen. That's how he operated, relentlessly. But as he entered the glass-walled conference room, he found Nina already sitting at the table, her back straight, her eyes hard and unreadable. "Morning," Alex said, trying to sound casual. He took a seat across from her, sensing the weight in the air. Nina didn't return his greeting immediately. Instead, she slid a folder toward him. The look in her eyes was calculating, almost cold. "What's this?" Alex asked, his voice cautious as he flipped open the folder. The documents inside were financial reports, projections, and contracts, all related to the company. But there was one thing that stood out, a proposal for a merger. "I've been working with a third party," Nina said, her tone clipped. "They're offering a significant investment in Greystone. It's a game changer, Alex. It's the only way we can expand the way we've always talked about." Alex narrowed his eyes. "You've been working with them behind my back." He hadn't been informed about any third-party negotiations, let alone a merger. She didn't flinch. "We need this, Alex. You and I both know that we can't grow without taking bigger risks. We can't stay in the small leagues forever." "Then why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. Nina exhaled, clearly frustrated. "Because you're too conservative, Alex. You're afraid of change. And in business, change is the only constant. We can't afford to wait anymore." Alex's mind raced. He had always prided himself on his meticulous planning, his ability to make calculated decisions. But Nina was right about one thing: they had stagnated. The company was doing well, but it wasn't growing the way it should have. The market was changing, and he wasn't sure if they were prepared for it. But a merger, especially without his involvement, that felt like a betrayal. She was going behind his back to make decisions that affected everything they had worked for. "Why didn't you involve me in this?" Alex repeated, softer this time, his voice laced with a quiet hurt. Nina's gaze flickered, a brief moment of something he couldn't quite place in her eyes. It was almost guilt. No, that wasn't possible. She wasn't the type to feel guilty. "I didn't think you'd agree to it," she said, her voice now softer, almost apologetic. "I thought you'd say no, and we'd miss the opportunity. But now it's too late. Too late." The room seemed to close in around Alex as he looked at her. The air felt thicker, the space between them charged with something he couldn't put into words. He had never seen her like this before, so detached, so distant. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. "I need some time to think about this," Alex said, standing up abruptly. The tension in the room was unbearable. He needed to get out, to clear his head. But as he turned to leave, Nina's voice stopped him cold. "You'll regret it if you don't make a decision, Alex. I promise you that." As Alex walked back to his office, his thoughts were a whirlwind of doubt and confusion. What was happening to Nina? Was this really just about business? Or was there something deeper at play? He couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that this was no longer just a partnership. And then it hit him. The email. The ultimatum. Nina had already made her choice. The morning after their conversation in the conference room, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. His mind kept circling back to the folder Nina had handed him, the merger proposal. She had been so cold, so calculated, but she had never been like that before. It was as if a mask had slipped, revealing a side of her that he had never seen, a side that wasn't just professional, but ruthlessly self-serving. Despite his gut telling him to stay cautious, Alex did what he always did, he threw himself into work. But his focus kept drifting back to Nina. The company's future was riding on decisions that were made in moments like this, but he couldn't move forward without understanding what was really happening behind the scenes. So, he did what any paranoid CEO would do: he began digging. It started small. A simple check of the merger proposal, just to understand more about the third-party company Nina was working with. But one thing led to another, and soon Alex was uncovering documents and emails that didn't sit right with him. He found email threads between Nina and a company called Titan Holdings, a powerful, anonymous investment firm that had a reputation for ruthless acquisitions. But it wasn't just business talk. There were personal emails, ones that made Alex's blood run cold. They were more than just collaborators. Nina and the head of Titan Holdings, a man named Victor Zorin, were in constant contact. And the nature of their communication was far too intimate for it to be just about business. Alex scrolled through the messages with a sinking feeling in his stomach. The language was casual, even flirtatious at times, with phrases like, "You know what I want, Nina," and "Let's not let our little arrangement get out of hand." The more he read, the more the pieces of his life began to shatter. There it was. The real betrayal, lurking just beneath the surface of their partnership, hidden in plain sight. But the worst part? It wasn't just Nina's affair with Victor. It was that she had been plotting the takeover of Greystone with him from the very beginning. The merger wasn't an opportunity. It was a calculated move, a way to strip Alex of control without him even realizing it. Nina had been working behind his back, building her own empire with Victor, using their shared company as a stepping stone. As the weight of this revelation hit him, Alex's mind flashed back to the earlier conversations. The merger proposal. The cold detachment in her eyes. The way she'd shrugged off his concerns. It had all been building to this moment, and now it was clear, Nina hadn't just betrayed him in a professional sense. She had betrayed him on a deeply personal level. She had been playing him, using their bond for her own gain, and all along, he had been too blind to see it. Anger surged through him, hotter than anything he had ever felt before. Betrayal was one thing. But this? This was treason. He had given her everything: trust, loyalty, love. And she had used it all against him. At that moment, Alex knew there was only one thing he could do. He had to confront her. He had to make her pay for this. But even as the anger boiled in his veins, a voice inside his head told him to be careful. Revenge was a dangerous game. But what choice did he have? He couldn't just sit back and let her destroy everything he had worked for. She had crossed a line, and now it was time for him to cross his own. That evening, Alex arranged to meet Nina at their usual spot, a private office in the heart of their headquarters. It was quiet there, away from the prying eyes of employees and investors, where they could talk, or argue, without anyone else knowing. When Nina walked in, she was as composed as ever, her expression a mask of cool professionalism. But Alex could see it now, the small twitch of her eye, the barely noticeable hesitation in her step. She knew something was off, but she didn't know that he knew. Not yet. "Alex," she said, her voice smooth but tight, like she was holding something back. "I'm glad you called. We need to finalize everything with Titan. They're ready to move forward." He didn't waste any time. "I know about you and Victor." Her face didn't change. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't even defensive. Instead, there was something more chilling in her response: resignation. "You've been spying on me?" she asked, her voice laced with thinly veiled disdain. "You've always been too controlling, Alex. This was never about you. You're too small-time, too old-fashioned. I gave you a chance, but you didn't listen." "Small-time?" Alex repeated, incredulous. "This company was mine. I built it. And you," his voice cracked with the weight of it, but he didn't stop. "You've been plotting behind my back. You and Victor. You were never in this for us. It was always about you." Nina's lips curled into a small, almost pitying smile. Alex, don't you get it? You were a stepping stone. A means to an end. I'm smarter than you, I always have been. I knew you'd never be willing to make the hard choices. So I made them for us. For me. For a moment, Alex was too stunned to speak. This wasn't the woman he had trusted with his life, the woman who had shared his dreams and fears. This was someone else entirely, someone willing to sell him out for the sake of her own ambition. Why, he finally asked, the word falling out in a half-whisper. Why didn't you just tell me? We could have built this together. We could have. Built what, Alex? She interrupted, her tone rising with a bitterness he had never heard before. A small business that caters to the wealthy? Greystone was never going to be more than that. Not with you at the helm. I need more. I deserve more. The word stung like a slap to the face, but Alex refused to back down. He clenched his fists, the fury surging within him. You'll never have it, Nina. You've crossed a line you can't come back from. She didn't even flinch. Then stop me. And that was it, the final moment. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. The silence in the office was suffocating. Alex's mind was spinning, still reeling from the revelations Nina had dropped like bombs, shattering every belief he had about their partnership. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted with everything, had torn everything apart with a casual, cold disregard. Yet as her words echoed in his mind, I deserve more. Something snapped within him. Nina wasn't just an adversary now. She was an enemy. And enemies were meant to be dealt with. He had to find a way to take back control. But where to start? The betrayal was one thing. The destruction of everything he had worked for was another. But the real question, the one that kept gnawing at him, was whether he could ever truly trust anyone again. Stop me, she had said. Alex's eyes narrowed. He had always been the one to strategize, to plan 3 steps ahead. He wasn't going to let her manipulate him into a corner. But as he stared at her, he realized that Nina wasn't his only problem. The merger with Titan Holdings was already in motion, and there was no telling how deep her influence went. Victor Zorin wasn't some random investor, he was a powerful, ruthless figure. And Nina had already placed their company's future in his hands. Alex had to move fast. The clock was ticking. The first move Alex made was to call his most trusted advisors. He needed someone in his corner, someone who would help him take back control. As he sat in his office, waiting for his closest confidant, Jacob, to arrive, his mind kept going back to the merger. Nina had never fully explained the details, but Alex had always assumed it was a simple investment opportunity, a way to get more capital, expand their business. Now, he realized that was far from the truth. Titan Holdings wasn't interested in capital. They were interested in acquisition. The more Alex dug into the company, the more it became clear, Titan wasn't just a business partner. They were vultures circling his empire, waiting for it to fall so they could pick the bones clean. Jacob's knock on the door broke Alex's train of thought. As he looked up, he saw the familiar face of his most trusted advisor enter the room. Jacob had been with Alex since the beginning, he had witnessed the rise of Greystone Enterprises, helped make the tough decisions, and had always kept Alex grounded when things got out of hand. But now, Alex wasn't so sure. Alex, what's going on? You sounded urgent, Jacob asked, taking a seat across from him. I need to know everything you can find on Titan Holdings, Alex said, cutting straight to the chase. We've been compromised. Jacob raised an eyebrow, clearly confused. What do you mean, compromised? The merger? Alex nodded grimly. The merger is just the tip of the iceberg. Nina has been working with them, behind my back. But that's not the worst part. They're planning to take over Greystone entirely. Jacob's eyes widened. What? How did you? I found the emails, Alex interrupted. Nina and Victor Zorin, the head of Titan, have been in contact for months. They're planning to sell off the company piece by piece. We're being played, Jacob. And I need you to dig deeper, find out who else is involved in this. Jacob didn't respond immediately, his gaze shifting from Alex to the floor. Alex could tell he was processing the information, trying to piece together the puzzle. This is bigger than you realize, Jacob said slowly, finally meeting Alex's eyes. If Titan is involved, you're looking at more than just a hostile takeover. They're a juggernaut. They don't care about the company, Alex. They'll destroy everything we've built if it serves their purpose. I know, Alex replied, frustration seeping into his voice. But I need to know how deep this goes. Nina wasn't just using me for business. She's in it for power. She's not going to stop until she has everything. Jacob leaned forward, his voice lowering. You're not the only one they've targeted, are you? Alex's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Jacob met his gaze. I've been hearing rumors, Alex. Whispers about Titan trying to leverage other companies for their expansion. And some of those whispers, they involve people you know. People inside Greystone. Alex froze, his blood running cold. It wasn't just Nina. She had allies. Titan had infiltrated more than just his professional life, they had infiltrated his inner circle. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. He wasn't just fighting Nina anymore. He was fighting an enemy that had already gained ground within his company. Jacob's words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Alex felt fear creeping in. But he refused to show it. He couldn't afford weakness now. I need to know everything, Alex said, his voice firm, though the urgency in his chest was threatening to overtake him. Who's with Titan? Who's feeding them information? And who else is betraying me? The next few days were a blur of frantic calls, secret meetings, and surveillance. Alex threw himself into the search for answers, determined to uncover the full extent of the betrayal. He had to know who was feeding information to Titan, who had turned against him, and who else might be pulling the strings. The deeper he dug, the more he began to see that Titan wasn't just focused on Greystone's acquisition. They were slowly and methodically picking off other companies in Alex's network, companies that were integral to the infrastructure of his business. And the more he learned, the more the web of deceit began to unwind. He discovered that a handful of key employees at Greystone, people he had trusted implicitly, had been feeding Titan confidential company data for months. It wasn't just Nina. It wasn't just Victor. It was a coordinated effort to weaken Greystone from within, to make it ripe for takeover. But even in the face of this growing conspiracy, Alex refused to give up. If Nina thought she had outsmarted him, she was gravely mistaken. He had seen the signs of her manipulation, the subtle ways she had turned the employees against him, the way she had undermined his authority without him even realizing it. He had always believed in her vision, in their shared goals, but he had never considered that her ambition might extend beyond Greystone. Now he understood the brutal truth. Nina had been playing him from the start, and she wasn't alone. The more Alex thought about it, the clearer it became, revenge wasn't just about tearing down Nina and Titan Holdings. It wasn't about bringing down the people who had wronged him. It was about reclaiming his life, his company, and his dignity. Every step of the way, Nina had been methodical, calculating. She hadn't just betrayed him professionally, she had destroyed their relationship, weaponized their love, and exploited his trust for her own gain. If she thought she could strip him of everything without consequence, she was sorely mistaken. Alex wasn't going to kneel, not to her, and not to anyone. The first step in his revenge had been gathering the evidence. The files from Jacob, the internal documents that exposed the extent of Titan Holdings' infiltration, were enough to ruin them. He knew this. The only problem was timing. Alex had spent days piecing together the evidence, finding the connections, and realizing something: he couldn't just bring down Nina and Titan. They were part of something bigger. Their reach went deep into politics, corporate rivalries, and even law enforcement. If he moved too quickly, too publicly, the backlash would be catastrophic, not just for him, but for everyone involved. The next step had to be tactical, precise. Revenge wasn't a show of force, it was a game of patience, of waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alex waited for the perfect storm. It came sooner than expected. The opportunity came 1 week after Nina's betrayal was exposed. Jacob had been invaluable, feeding him intelligence about Titan Holdings' key moves. He had uncovered plans for an all-important board meeting, a meeting where the final decision about the merger would be made. Nina and Victor would be there, but so would other key investors, legal experts, and rivals. It was a public affair, an opportunity for Nina and her new partner to finalize everything they'd worked for. But Alex had a plan of his own. The morning of the meeting, Alex was in his private office, going through the documents one last time. He had everything ready. A carefully orchestrated series of leaks, planted information, and legal maneuvers were set to create chaos at the board meeting. The legal documents would make it clear to the board that Titan Holdings had been manipulating financial statements to undervalue Greystone Enterprises. They'd forged signatures, fabricated reports, a series of crimes that could destroy Titan if they were made public. It was only a matter of time before the board would begin to question everything. But Alex wasn't going to just sabotage their plans. No. He was going to expose Nina for what she was, a traitor, a manipulator, someone who had used him for power. When the time came, he would drop the bombshell. Nina and Victor wouldn't see it coming. The boardroom was buzzing with tension when Alex walked in, carrying an air of calm confidence that had been hard-won after days of strategic planning. He had learned to hide his emotions in front of others, but today, every step he took was filled with purpose. He wasn't just going to sit at the table as he always had, he was taking his seat back. This was his company, his legacy. And it was time to make Nina realize that. Nina and Victor were already sitting at the head of the table when Alex entered. Nina looked up from a conversation with Victor and gave him a tight, unreadable smile, her eyes cool and distant. Victor, for his part, was a stark contrast, all sharp suits and cold ambition. He didn't even acknowledge Alex's entrance, treating him as if he were a mere nuisance in their plans. Alex took his seat at the opposite end of the long table. He noticed the looks exchanged between some of the board members. They weren't sure who to side with, but Alex knew that uncertainty was his ally. "We're gathered today," the chairman said, a formal tone taking over the room, "to finalize the merger between Greystone Enterprises and Titan Holdings." Nina leaned forward, her eyes glinting with confidence. She had made it. Titan was going to take over Greystone. She had already won. Alex could see it in her face. She thought this was the moment she'd been waiting for, the moment she would crush him and leave him with nothing. But she was wrong. Alex stood slowly, his voice cutting through the room as he addressed the board. "Before we proceed, I have something important to show you all. I think you should know what's really been happening behind closed doors." The room went silent. Nina stiffened. Victor narrowed his eyes, sensing that something wasn't right. Alex took a breath and slid a thick file onto the table, letting the weight of it sink in. He had all the evidence. The forged documents. The emails between Nina and Victor. The illegal dealings. The conspiracy. "This is a compilation of internal communications, financial documents, and legal records," Alex said, his voice steady, "that proves Titan Holdings has been involved in criminal activity from the beginning. Titan and Nina have been systematically sabotaging Greystone Enterprises to take control of it." Nina's expression shifted, the mask of confidence slipping as she realized what was happening. Victor stood up abruptly, trying to interrupt, but Alex continued, his eyes fixed on Nina. "You thought you could manipulate me, betray me, and get away with it. But I won't let you destroy everything I've built. This isn't just about business anymore, Nina. This is personal. The room was in chaos. Board members murmured amongst themselves, some pulling out their phones, others looking nervously between Nina and Alex. The legal team was scrambling to get their hands on the documents, and the chairman was trying to restore order. But Nina wasn't done. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You think this is going to work, Alex?" she spat, her voice sharp and bitter. "You think you can just ruin everything I've worked for because of some petty vengeance? You're too weak for this game." Alex shook his head. "No. I'm not weak, Nina. I'm not the man you thought you could control. You made a mistake underestimating me." Nina took a step forward, her voice low and dangerous. "You're going to regret this, Alex. You'll see." But it was too late for threats. The evidence had already been presented, and the board was turning against her. The stakes were too high. The game had changed, and Nina knew it. The aftermath was swift. Nina was ousted from Greystone Enterprises, her name tarnished. Victor Zorin and Titan Holdings were publicly exposed for their illegal activities, and investigations into their financial dealings began. The merger was cancelled, and their influence in the company dissolved. As for Alex, the victory was bittersweet. He had reclaimed his company, but the cost had been steep. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, was gone from his life, and in her place was only the cold, unrelenting truth of what she had done. He had avenged himself, but he had also lost a part of himself in the process. As Alex stood in his office later that evening, looking out at the city skyline, he couldn't help but wonder about the future. This battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There were always more enemies, more power struggles, more betrayals waiting just around the corner. But Alex was ready for them. He had learned one thing: no one, not even the ones you trust most, could be allowed to steal your soul. And if anyone tried, they would regret it. The city lights outside Alex's office flickered like distant stars in the vast expanse of the skyline, but the glow of victory in his chest felt far dimmer than the radiant horizon before him. He had won. Nina was out. Titan Holdings had been publicly exposed, its leaders under investigation, and Greystone Enterprises was safe, for now. The reports were circulating, the media had taken hold of the story, and Alex's personal vendetta had been satisfied. His company was intact, the shares would stabilize, and the people he trusted, those who remained loyal, would continue working alongside him. But as he stared out at the city, a heavy sense of something deeper lingered in his bones. He had lost something more than just a business partner. His trust, his connection to Nina, had been shattered into irreparable pieces. The woman who had been his equal, his confidant, was now nothing more than a distant memory. She wasn't just gone, she was a reminder of the dangerous game of ambition, betrayal, and deception he had played, and how far people could go for power. Alex had come so close to losing everything, yet the weight of victory didn't feel like the freedom he had imagined. It felt hollow. Nina had taken more than his company. She had taken a part of him, his heart, his belief in people, his sense of loyalty. But in the same breath, he knew that was over now. She had crossed a line that could never be undone. She had been a reflection of what he could have become if ambition had consumed him entirely. And now, with her gone, he was forced to confront the emptiness she left behind. "Mr. Greystone." Jacob's voice broke through Alex's reverie, a soft knock on the door before he entered. The younger man's face, usually calm, was now filled with an odd mixture of apprehension and excitement. Alex turned away from the window, taking a moment to straighten his jacket and gather his thoughts. "Jacob," he said, his voice composed, but his gaze hard. "What is it?" "Sir, the board is ready for the meeting. They're all asking for you. It's time to take control of Greystone again, officially. This is your moment to reassert leadership." Alex paused. The weight of Jacob's words sank in, but it didn't feel as triumphant as he had expected. There was no denying it, though, his next move would solidify his grip on Greystone. He had won, but now, the real challenge began. Leadership in the aftermath of betrayal was never simple. Greystone had to be restructured. Some loyalists had stuck around, but others who had sided with Nina had already been let go or had resigned in disgrace. "I'll be there in a moment," Alex replied quietly. Jacob hesitated, sensing something wasn't right, but he said nothing. Once Jacob left, Alex took a deep breath, his reflection in the glass reminding him that this was his fight, his company, his world. But the shadow of the past lingered. There was unfinished business. And not just with Titan Holdings. As Alex straightened his tie and walked to the meeting, his phone buzzed again. It was an unknown number, but something about the sudden buzz made his stomach tighten. He glanced down. "You think this is over, Alex?" "I wouldn't be so sure." It was from Nina. The words punched through him like a blade, a reminder that while he might have won today, the war was far from over. Alex had no doubt that Nina would be back in some way, shape, or form. She wouldn't just disappear. She wasn't the kind of person to let things go. Alex's fingers hovered over the phone. He didn't need to respond. But something was gnawing at him, a deep, instinctual feeling that this text wasn't a simple warning. It was a sign, a breadcrumb left deliberately to make him question everything. Nina was still in the game, still pulling strings, and there were pieces of her plan that hadn't yet been revealed. The boardroom was filled with the usual suspects, the air thick with uncertainty. Alex stood at the front, his posture poised, but his mind was still on the cryptic message. Was she bluffing? Had Nina really given up, or was this just the beginning of another play, something even more dangerous than what he had just endured? "We've taken a hit," Alex began, his voice cutting through the chatter. "But we're not done. Greystone Enterprises has always been more than just a company. It's a symbol. A foundation for everyone who believes in integrity, ambition, and loyalty. And I plan to keep it that way." His words were met with quiet nods, approval. The board members seemed to respond to his command, but there was a palpable undercurrent of caution in their eyes. Alex knew that it wasn't just Nina who could threaten his empire, it was Titan Holdings and the people behind them, those who lurked in the shadows, who saw this moment as an opportunity. The moment Alex had been preparing for finally arrived. The decision on how to restructure Greystone was set to be made, but it was the stakes that concerned him. Each move he made had to be calculated. He couldn't afford another betrayal. "Let's begin," Alex said, his voice steady, although his mind was already racing. He was ready. But that message from Nina, and the mysterious implication of something deeper, weighed heavily on him. Later that night, as Alex walked to his car, a sense of foreboding crept into his bones. Everything in his world was changing, but not in the way he'd expected. His revenge had been complete, but something in the back of his mind told him that the true battle for Greystone had only just begun. He had won today. He had reclaimed his empire, but his victory had come at a cost. It wasn't just Nina he had to worry about. There were still unanswered questions. Nina's departure might have ended one chapter, but there were always more players, always new betrayals just beneath the surface. The final text from Nina echoed in his mind as he stared out at the road ahead, "I wouldn't be so sure." The game was far from over.